Alright, what's going on guys? My name is Nick and I welcome you to my first review of 2017 video game review-wise. And today we're going to be talking about Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, a game that I completed last week on the channel. So if you haven't checked that out, I don't know why you're watching this video. But anyways, so for 2017 I decided that I would kind of change up how I did reviews, video game reviews, because I really do enjoy doing them. But I don't like the whole talking behind a camera over gameplay because I don't feel it's as natural as I would like to be. So I thought for 2017 I'd kind of mix in a little bit of a vlog style as well. Let me know in the comment box what you guys think, if you guys prefer this or if you guys prefer the old method of just me talking over straight gameplay, and then we'll see where we stand. But anyways, let's get to the review. Alright, so one thing to note, I have purposely not played the DLC that came out this week before shooting this review, and the reason why I did that is because I didn't want my opinions of the DLC to skew what I thought of the main story of the game, although a lot of us know that it's Capcom and most likely the DLC was probably cut out, especially when you take into account that the DLC has come out a week after, literally just 1 week after the game officially came out. But anyways, so once again, I have not played the DLC yet and my review score does not reflect whether or not I played it or not, if I liked it or not, or what I thought about it. Alright, so I always like to start my reviews talking about the story of the game, and probably not surprisingly, because it's always been kind of part and parcel of Resident Evil games, that the story is not the strongest aspect of the game. It's probably actually the weakest aspect of the game, but you're not playing as any of the traditional characters that we're used to, such as Jill Valentine, Chris Redfield, or Leon Kennedy, these super powered, you don't know how they survive the zombie apocalypse so many times. It's basically you're playing as a normal guy now. You're playing as a normal character named Ethan, and you're on a hunt for your wife who you thought went missing 3 years ago, and out of the blue you receive a message from her via the internet, and you're kind of set off on a path to try to find her because you love her, all that kind of stuff. So your journey takes you to this mysterious house, and you're basically following the breadcrumbs that your wife has left you, and you're pretty much on an adventure to decipher what exactly has happened, what has happened to your wife, what has happened to the family, and basically what has happened to set in motion all of these horrific events and the reasoning for all these supernatural activities that has happened. And that's pretty much it. And like I said, the story is not the most engaging, but it actually works fairly well for the narrative of the game. And basically I didn't really come into the game expecting more out of a Resident Evil franchise in terms of story. The story works well and the pacing is pretty decent along the way, and there are a little bit of surprises along the way that kind of keep you engaged the entire time. Alright, so most of us can agree that in order to have a good story you need a strong set of characters. And funny enough, the character that you're playing with in the majority of the game, Ethan, is actually probably the weakest character in the entire game. Because we have to remember that Ethan's just a normal dude. He's just a normal guy that they've introduced in this game. He's not any of these super-powered heroes that we've come to kind of know in the past with Resident Evil games. And he's just a guy looking for his wife. And for a guy who's encountering some of the most terrifying scenarios and circumstances that would make normal people basically shipwrecks the entire way through, he handles it remarkably well, and to a point where it's almost actually somewhat kind of unbelievable and kind of actually takes away a little bit of the game. So I think if Capcom would have made him more realistic, more relatable, actually make him seem like he was actually afraid, it would have gone a long way into making the atmosphere of the game a lot better. So the strongest character in this game is definitely the Baker family. From the very first time you sit down with them and have dinner with them, to the multiple terrifying encounters that you have with them throughout the entire game. Each encounter is a little bit different, each is a little unique, and what makes it even more is that each encounter is absolutely terrifying and believable. Their voice acting is superb the entire way through, and every time you run into them you literally feel like just running away for the majority of the game. And I thought, once again, their characters were just absolutely great, awesome. If Capcom could create more characters like this in the future, I would be completely on board with it. Alright, so let's move on to gameplay. And the gameplay in Resident Evil 7 is an absolute kind of like a roller coaster ride. I would actually define it as a tale of 3 different games packaged into one. I don't know if this is a problem of direction, whether or not they're running out of time, but the entire gameplay experience was not cohesive at all the entire way through. So let's start at the first stage, the first of 3, which is most definitely the best part of the entire game. From the moment you start as Ethan to your entire experience inside the Resident Evil supernatural house owned by the Baker family, it's amazing. It's absolutely spot on for a horror game. It's almost exactly what I expected the PT game that was canceled, originally being created by Hideo Kojima and Konami. That's basically what I expected PT to be. The first bit of Resident Evil 7, at least the first half anyways, while you're still in the entire haunted house. And yeah, it's amazing, from the atmosphere to the enemies when you first encounter them, the blob creatures for the very first time, and up until all the boss battles, which actually felt very unique and different and terrifying the entire way through. So the first half of Resident Evil 7 is definitely thumbs up. They absolutely nailed it, but unfortunately it kind of takes a huge nosedive after that. Alright, so let's talk about the second wave of gameplay. And without diving into too much of the spoiler territory, the game takes a complete change in environment and scenery. You do not play the entire time inside the haunted house. If you could, that would have been awesome, but you don't. To get a little bit more of the backstory, the environment changes, and it's not for a good thing, because not only does the environment feel a lot less intimate, a lot less scary or terrifying, you're still encountering the same enemy types that you encountered previously, and at this time though, their impact is not nearly as strong. After a couple of minutes into a new area, you feel well armed, you know how to deal with them correctly, and it's just generally less scary. It's a little more action oriented, and it definitely loses its impact and luster from what you've experienced from the first half of the game. So that's the first dip, and when you finally move on to the third dip, it just becomes basically a shoot 'em up action adventure, and it's no longer anything like you experienced in the first half or 3/4 of the game. It's basically kind of It's kind of like basically our feelings what happened to Resident Evil 6, and kind of exactly what happened to Resident Evil 5 near the tail end. It just becomes an action-oriented game, and you're pretty much finishing off the story for the sake of finishing off the story. It becomes far less enjoyable than what you've had, and it's a real shame, because for the first half of the game, it was so good. It was so awesome, and it just takes a complete nosedive down, a poop nosedive down. It went from being a really like a 9 game to my final score of the game, which I will get to a little bit later. Alright, so let's finish off with graphics, presentation, artistic values, and marks for the game. And the graphics of the game actually kind of ride the exact same wave as the gameplay. It's kind of broken up into 3 stages, which is not a good thing at all. Once again, it's not a good thing. So the first half of the game, once you're inside the haunted house, it's amazing. The game is not the most polygon fill count game. It is not the most graphically beautiful game out there. But how it compensates with this is that they just absolutely nail the atmosphere in terms of design, structure, pacing. Sound is some of the most terrifying sound I've ever played in the game. You always feel like there's like something behind you in real life. The game just absolutely pulls you in with the atmosphere. The problem is, with the change of the gameplay came the change of environments, and the game opened up and everything just became a lot more bland. Once you leave the house, the second stage, it's okay. It's just not as terrifying as the haunted house. And when you reach the third stage of the game that I talked about earlier, it's just a crapshoot from there. And it's just without spoilers, it's literally just a generic tunnel. It's a mine shaft. And there's nothing unique about this mine shaft. It has the same enemy types that you've encountered earlier, and there's just nothing to it. It's literally just it almost feels like it was a lazy way to finish off the game. And Alright, so wrapping up this review of Resident Evil 7, so it's a definite improvement of the testosterone-filled action-adventure ride Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. Resident Evil 6 was just a gigantic hot mess of like 4 different games. Once again, this game is still kind of the same way, even though you're still following the storyline of one single character. It's honestly, like I said, it's a tale of 3 different games kind of jammed into one. And I think the reasoning for that is Capcom really didn't want to completely reboot this franchise and kind of dive wholeheartedly into a pure survival horror game, because they probably honestly didn't know how well it was going to be received. And I think they kind of just like hedged their bets and made it two different games and kind of piecemeal them together, and the final result is Resident Evil 7. But what I think is that with the reception and the critical review and the feedback they're going to get from this community, the gaming community that is, that they're going to realize and hear that the horror part was definitely the best part of Resident Evil 7, and it's definitely something they could just make a whole game of. They don't have to worry about this intricate storyline that pulls at your heartstrings, and they should try to probably stay away from the kind of typical action adventure game of generic game X out there. They should just try to be their own thing, try to stick with what works for them, which is definitely the horror and supernatural aspect of the game. But for now, Resident Evil 7 is definitely a positive step in the direction of the series, and I'm looking forward to the next one. I'm looking forward to playing the DLC that has just released this week, and yeah, that's basically all you can say. It's a decent game. It could be better, but it's just one small step in the right direction that hopefully the series will take in the future.